If you're metabolically challenged, glucose levels are often higher than they should be because there's a delivery problem. Now, in the case of glucose, the problem stems from the fact that the GLUT4 gate doesn't respond to insulin. So glucose levels accumulate in the blood and get up to all sorts of mischief. But glucose is not the only nutrient which is not being delivered. Fats are higher too. This manifests as hypertriglyceremia, and it's often the first manifestation of metabolic troubles. High triglyceride levels are officially part of metabolic syndrome, that is, insulin resistance. But the connection between them and insulin is not obvious because insulin doesn't directly handle fats. But since insulin is in charge of putting away the groceries, and fats are an important grocery, insulin definitely influences what happens to them. However, in people who are insulin resistant, unlike with glucose, insulin has no problem putting away fat. Or does he? Join us for this episode of Better Body Chemistry TV as we dive into the biology of lipolysis, that is, fat burning at a molecular level. Better Body Chemistry TV is brought to you by Dr. Sandy, a scientist turned gremlin buster, helping you battle sugar gremlins, heifer lumps, and other health horribles through better body chemistry. Remember, small things can make a big difference to your health. Now, in the metabolically challenged, there are an awful lot of fat containing proteins doing the rounds. The thinking is that the liver is going crazy shipping them out. And an extension of this idea is the fats are high because you're eating too much fat. But it's not that simple. Cells must first take delivery of those triglycerides before they can be burned for energy. They're big and bulky, and there is no gate. So it's complicated, and adding to the difficulties, there are two ways triglycerides can be delivered. You can either eat the fats or you can take advantage of the fats that have been stored for rainy days. Some of us have supplies that could last for 40 days and 40 nights. If the fats are coming from dinner, they're being carried in chylomicrons, which are enormous conglomerates of triglycerides assembled by the enterocytes in the intestine. If the fats are coming from stores, they're being carried in lipoproteins, which are put together by the liver. Now, the lipoprotein we are all familiar with is LDL. This is where high concentrations of cholesterol are found. What happens to or doesn't happen to these lipoproteins gets an awful lot of attention. But those LDL particles start off as the particles moving triglycerides around. In this form, they're referred to as VLDL particles. The liver creates them by packaging lots of triglycerides and small amounts of cholesterol into a protein shell. The cholesterol is primarily there to provide structural support. So, what happens to these lipoprotein particles as they whirl around the body at breakneck speed? Well, they're grabbed by hungry cells. Grabbed. There is no gate. And the hungry cells don't have direct access to the lipoprotein particles because the endothelial cells that line the capillaries are in the way. Now, they're not deliberately obstructing delivery. In fact, they do what they can to help. So, let's look at how the transaction plays out. The cell wanting a fat delivery, which could be a heart, muscle, or fat cell, negotiates with their nearest endothelial cell to take a delivery. The order is made when they ship their lipoprotein lipase enzyme, LPL for short, to the border. Now, LPL has an entourage, which ensures that the LPL is attached to the surface of the endothelial cell, which allows it to dangle from the side and be able to flag down a passing lipoprotein. Now, because fat cells are in the business of storing fat, they have a vast array of LPLs on standby. These guys are typically deployed after a meal, whereas heart and muscle cells work more on a just-in-time model. They have fewer LPLs and they deploy them according to their needs and desires. For muscle cells, the demand for fat peaks after a workout, not during one. During workouts, muscles prefer to burn sugar. Now, the processing of the order requires endothelial cell participation. The endothelial cell locks onto the LPL via a special transporter protein called glycosyl phosphatidylinositol anchored high density lipoprotein binding protein, or GPI-HBP1 for short. Aish, that's still a mouthful. Let's just call it the LPL chaperone. Now, the LPL chaperone allows the LPL to bounce from one side of the endothelial cell to the other and back again. And this helps the LPL flag down a lipoprotein particle when it swings by. Amazingly, the LPL, with the help of that little chaperone, manages to stop the lipoprotein particle and board it. Once inside, he grabs the triglycerides and begins slicing and dicing them to release individual fatty acids. The individual fatty acids and glycerol exit the lipoprotein and are grabbed by the endothelial cells and passed across to the cell that put in the order. Yes, some spill out, but most of it goes to the cell that placed the order or to his associates. When the lipoprotein has been stripped bare, LPL jumps off, releasing it to continue on its rounds. In the case of the chylomicrons, they're kaput and are referred to as chylomicron remnants. These remnants make their way back to the liver where they are disassembled for parts. In the case of the VLDL particles, with most of the triglycerides gone, what is left is cholesterol, and they've now morphed to LDL particles, which proceed on their way to deliver cholesterol to cells who are making the call for this important resource. Now, what happens to the fatty acids depends on which cell placed the order. If it was a fat cell, the fats are taken up and dutifully stored for a rainy day. Fat cells don't use the fatty acids for fuel. They run on carbs. All other cells accessing the fatty acids use the majority of the fatty acids for fuel, although on occasion they keep a small stash of fats on hand for emergencies. Join us for the next video in this series as we look at what goes wrong when you're insulin resistant and what you can do to maximize that fat burning process so you create better body chemistry and better health. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Remember, small things can make a big difference to your health.